there are already 2 clean transportation network action teams. How would this group work with those other groups?
Well, a couple of pieces. I think it was also like sort of what were the differences between those as well. And I think the key element of this, and this is a good carryover, sort of segue from the previous network action team that I was a part of, is there's sort of a unifying theme of all of our transportation needs, and that they require significant upfront investment. So rather than looking at sort of cause and effect, we're primarily looking at a funding mechanism in particular to be able to continue to channel investments into critical areas, whether that's public transit, EV deployment, walking and biking infrastructure, you name it. So I see this as being complementary in the sense that the work of these other groups is great for case making in terms of pursuing cap and invest. However, I think there's a marked difference between finding a suitable funding mechanism and developing a blueprint for the equitable investment of those funds compared to, say, very issue-specific or location-specific clean transportation initiatives. But
yeah, I'll just say that the previous network action team actually informed this network action team. It defined where we are going to focus the emphasis of this network action team. So it's not that they are 2 different discussions, it's one that informed the next one.
All right. What are the differences and pros and cons between cap and invest for transportation and the low carbon fuel standard for transportation? If you feel like you can answer that question.
That is a big question and requires a long answer, but I will say first and foremost that they are complementary. It's absolutely possible to have both. California has shown that you can have both. I would say one thing that Cap and Invest can do that is incredibly important given the conversations that we've had today, it is a proven policy that can guarantee emissions reduction at scale and to generate the revenue that you need to invest in the equity programs that we've been talking about all day. It is, we know from our experience with Reggie that it's something that it works and it generates the revenue that we need to be able to do the investments that we've been talking about. So that's in part why we want to be focusing this discussion on the investment part of what Cap and Invest can provide.
How will you overcome the governor's opposition to TCI? I assume that's opposition.
That is probably a multi-million dollar question at this particular juncture. What's that, Joey? And I think it's important to recognize, so for one, I think it's important to recognize that we're not looking solely at TCI. This is looking sort of across a whole variety of cap and invest programs. So lay that out at the outset. You know, I would say in terms of the governor's process and his thinking on this, you know, as folks may recall, we had included the Transportation Climate Initiative in the Climate Council's most recent climate action plan. Unfortunately, sort of the withdrawal of multiple states ended up really kind of putting that on hold. So there's a multitude of different other vehicles that we can utilize, whether that's the Climate Council proceedings, also moving that through the legislature, offering up enabling legislation. So I think overcoming it is really recognizing just the scale of investment needed to meet our binding climate requirements, and the fact that there are not many alternative funding mechanisms that will reach that pace and scale that we need to get there.
I would just add that this room is a room that can help inform people so that some of that opposition might be overcome. This room is full of people who are knowledgeable and who can be talking about this. To Jordan's point, I think that one of the things that we hope to bring to the table with this pitch is that there's a new crop of legislators that are going to come in. 30% of the legislators are going to be new. Many of them probably have never heard about something like Cap and Invest or a transportation standard, any of those things. It's important that we start getting clearer and simpler messaging out there as to what this can do for Vermont to reach its legal requirements in the transportation sector and to invest in equitable clean transportation. This is really one of the only ways to get there. That's why the Climate Council said they wanted to support TCIP. To Jordan's point again, we are not saying that TCIP is the only one. Nova Scotia, which is a small rural territory in Vermont, has joined a Cap and Invest system. We want to learn from their experience. And I think that the governor has some reasonable objections, and we need to understand how to respond to those objections. in a way that people can understand. And so that's part of what we want to be able to emphasize in this group is the education and outreach part, and to be sure that if it doesn't pass this year, but it might pass in future years, we lay the groundwork such that it will be successful in the future. You're looking at how it's happening in other states right now, other states that we tend to have similar types of priorities with. A Washington, an Oregon, a California, many other states are considering this now. We need to make sure that we're laying the groundwork so that in the future, whether it's this governor or another governor, we are able to implement something at this scale, because it's truly the only way we're going to reach our goals in the transportation sector.
Just, I think one closing piece, just recognizing that there are, when you look across WCI, TCIP, and a host of other cap and invest programs, you're talking about decades of research and education and outreach that's been conducted to try and get those off the ground. Yes, I will say that there were some flaws in some of those processes, but we definitely want to make sure that all of that time, that effort, that input, and really the very viable vehicles that they put forward aren't left on the table.
The bandwidth of policymakers is limited. Does it make sense to put effort into both a clean transportation standard and a cap and invest?
Absolutely does. A couple pieces there. So for one, a lot of my background was in conservation and wildlife protection, so I'll use sort of a classic example that I think of the policymaking space as being sort of an ecosystem. There are niche species that play very specific roles that support the overall health of an ecosystem. If you look at the climate movement, I think it's the same principle. You have to take multiple different approaches to problems and attack it at all different angles to solve it. Also, furthermore, I think a great example of the fact that there is a renewable energy standard and there's the regional greenhouse gas initiative. There's a cap and invest program as well as another metric within the state. It's a little bit apples to oranges, but all of us is to say, again, to Linda's point, that these can be very much so complementary programs. And I think furthermore, to actually get a cap and invest program off the ground at this juncture, it's going to take some time. So they're moving on different time frames. They're in different stages of their development, so I think they can both be moved concurrently or closely together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cara, I just wanted to add one thing.
Oh, sorry.
I see it as an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity to be able to show to the question that you had earlier on what are the pros and cons of either a transportation standard or cap and invest. That's a really good question. And it's one that we can lay out in relatively simple terms. And in fact, some work has already been done at EAN on that, and it's available online right now. But we'd like to carry that forward and again have this opportunity to help legislators who can't possibly understand all of these things. There's a lot that the legislators do have on their plate, but if we can make it in a simple format that says these are pros and cons, these are how they can work together, this is how other states have made it work, I think that this is an opportunity as opposed to an overload.
Okay, thanks to all of our presenters. Give them a round of applause.